This is Expat Sandwich. I'm Marty Walker.
Americans go into situations and we start off being nice, and then when things go bad, then we have our meltdowns. Whereas the French go into a situation kind of assuming something's going to go wrong. And then when it goes well, they're like wonderful and the most charming people in the world. That's how.
We've all heard of home renovation nightmares. In France, it's taken to a whole new level. The country is well known for its insane amount of bureaucracy. Delays are par for the course in any country, really, and so many things can go wrong. Misreading the plans, incorrect measurements, wrong parts. The list is long. But imagine trying to deal with all of this in a foreign country. You barely have a grasp of the language and very little knowledge of the culture. For this American chef, blogger, and cookbook author, a kitchen renovation in a newly purchased apartment in Paris just about sent him over the edge. He's even chronicled the kitchen renovation alongside cultural observations and must-try recipes in his new book, L'Appart, The Delights and Disasters of Making My Paris Home.
I'm David Lebovitz, and I've been living in Paris for about 15 years. When I bought my apartment, I feel like I went through a hazing. I had what's called a douche froide.
French for cold shower.
I made a huge mistake, and I had to fix it. And it really took all of me to do that, every ounce of energy and whatever I had. Everybody in France has like a horrible contractor story. I realized it was part of a club. Whenever you mention to someone, oh, I'm remodeling, oh, horrible, the contractor is a horrible.
Okay, so what compels a chef, right at the top of his career, to move to another country?
It was a very, interesting move for me because I was living in Northern California and working in a restaurant for many years at Chez Panisse, which was inspired by France and the cuisine, the attitude of France. It took me a few years to realize that it was sort of a lifestyle that I was used to. Northern California is very, French in a lot of ways. There's a lot of affinity. Outdoor markets, the garlic, the goat cheese, the red wine, and so forth. So I packed up and moved. I sold almost everything. It's interesting, over the years, people said, I want to do what you did. I'm like, okay, you got to get rid of your car. You got to get rid of all your luxuries and live in a one room, a studio, in Paris, which is, there's worse things in the world for sure. But, it's a different lifestyle. You have to be prepared to, give up a lot of things. I was entranced by the city. I didn't realize, what I was getting into, because you're sort of basically, when you travel, you're on vacation. Even if you go somewhere for a few months, you're still on vacation. But when you stay for many years, that's when you have to start making decisions, start dealing with things that are more serious and so forth. In my case, I ended up buying an apartment and renovating it, which did not go particularly well. My language skills weren't really good enough. Most importantly, my partner had said to me at the beginning, is like, don't be nice to anybody. He didn't mean it that way. The French have a different relationship with like salespeople and clerks. There's a reason, the boss in French, the word is chef, and you have to kind of act like it when you're running a project. And I didn't. I was very American. Oh, let's all go have lunch. Here, I brought you cookies. And I was like, oh, thank you, So I got taken advantage of.
The renovation was supposed to take 2 months. It went on for a year and a half.
That was my fault. So now I'm trying to get over not being super nice like that, but it's hard.
And then there's a difference in the concept of customer service. First, the American version.
People are really helpful. If you have to get cable service, it's a problem with your cell phone, you call them, or you go in the store, they help you. And they're really fast about it, and they really try to get it taken care of. And even if they can't, they still pretend that they can. You go to a store like the Gap, and you're like, do you have this in a medium? And they're like, I don't know. I think we do, but I'm not sure. We used to. It's like, can you just check? Because they can't say no. We're trained not to say no. Some of that's frustrating, but it's fairly gratifying to have people, you don't have to cajole them into helping you, which often, sometimes you have to do in France. They're not a customer service culture, whereas we are. A lot of things are sort of daily power struggles. You go into a store and the clerk is not there to be of service. They're not servants. They're there to do their job, which is to sell, batteries. Their job is not to be of service. Like that whole word public servant we have in the US for elected officials. That concept doesn't really exist in France.
And of course, one of the toughest things about moving to a foreign country is learning the language.
The French language is very difficult because there's a lot of sounds that we don't have in English. But there's also a lot of words. The French have a lot of, I do speak culinary French very well, and there's different words for every little tiny thing. So I'm used to that. When I bought my apartment, I had to learn all this hardware vocabulary, which was challenging because one kind of screw has a completely different word than like another kind of screw and so forth. I have to say the French have trouble too with their own language. So they're very forgiving in spite of what people say about them. The problem was I didn't speak fairly good French. So I didn't really, people would talk to me and I was like, kind of the village idiot. So you do have to put, your ego in check when you move to a foreign country.
The word bureaucracy comes from the French word bureau, which means desk or office. In the 18th century, France experienced a dramatic expansion of government under Louis XIV, which was accompanied by the rise of the French civil service. It was a phenomenon that became known as bureaumania, in which complex systems of bureaucracy emerged. In the 19th century, Napoleon tried to reform the bureaucracies of France into a standardized Napoleonic code, but unfortunately, it led to even further growth. Today, 1 in 5 French workers is a civil servant.
Americans, we complain about bureaucracy and paperwork and so forth. But France, is famous for its paperwork. It's famous for its bureaucracy. And that, I think, was the biggest surprise that I had to cope with. It's a very challenging process. During the last election in America, the French president had said, anybody who wants to move to France, come, we want you. Everyone's like, I'm moving. I'm like, hold on there just a minute. It's a lot of paperwork and it's a lot of anguish and so forth. What you have to kind of understand, I think, when you move abroad is that they're not waiting for you to move there. Their thing is not to welcome you to the country. Their thing is to make sure that, you are worthy of living in the country. And I don't just mean this about France. I mean this to anywhere, even including the United States. I always tell people, if you want to move to France, get a photocopier because you're going to copy a lot of papers. And bring a good book with you when you go.
I asked David to describe the difference between the French and American attitudes towards assimilation.
When you become French, or you live in France, they expect you to become French, to adopt French values. Whereas America, we're a nation of immigrants. So, when the question of what does it mean to be American, well, our parents might have come from Japan or Poland or England or America or Canada, and we sort of celebrate that diversity in a lot of ways. A lot of Americans have never left America, and we're used to when people come here, you have to speak English. We are very privileged in this country to be Americans. We're used to people coming here, adapting to us speaking English because American culture is so available around the world. I have to say, a lot of there's this image of the ugly American, but I've talked to like French shopkeepers, and they're like, who our favorite customers are? They're like the Americans and the Australians. There's like, they're so nice and so charming and funny, and you can see that because a lot of times we're very, for all our bravado, a lot of Americans go to France and they go into these shops and they're super nice because they don't want to make a mistake. And they're so sweet and they're like, excuse me, is it possible to buy one of these? And, how do I pay for this? And, da, 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 da.
And speaking of assimilation, how hard is it really to make friends in Paris?
It's very hard to meet people there. And I actually have French friends that say the same thing. They go, I wish I had more friends. Because the French are, I would say, much more reluctant to engage in a relationship with somebody, like a personal relationship. They're much more standoffish. I don't mean that in a bad way, but they don't do this whole small talk thing. But when they become your friends, they're incredible. They're very close. They'll do anything for you. And they're very committed. So that's the flip side of that.
Americans often interpret the French to be arrogant or blunt or overly critical. David shares his observations on this.
French people are they don't like being criticized, but on the other hand, they're very self-critical. I always thought that was fascinating about the French. Whereas, America, we've been used to a lot of people ridiculing us. I don't take it personally, but they sort of do. But there is that sort of apathy in France, and part of it is cultural. I wrote about this in my book. So if you don't like your meal in a restaurant, you're not like a complainer. You know that this beef should be cooked a certain way, and they don't know how to cook beef, and you should tell them. And you're helping them also. So they're much more used to that kind of frankness. And one thing I joke about with my other expat friends is how blunt partners can be. You come home with like a new shirt and your partner's like, I hate that color on you. And you think it's like, it's a great shirt, or it makes your stomach look fat. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you, Whereas in America, we always go, it's okay. You go, oh, it's an interesting color. I wouldn't have, So we don't say things like that. And the French are very blunt. You just have to get used to it.
I asked David what he misses about living in the United States.
We have so much diversity in this country. That's another thing Americans take for granted, and it's not perfect. However, you turn on the TV, and it's not unusual to see different people, different colors, sexual orientations, races, ethnicities, and even just TV commercials. We do a pretty good job of it compared to a lot of other places. I was surprised during the last election, not one person in France asked me anything about it after the election in November. People are seeing us as we're not necessarily our government, we're Americans. That's been a positive thing. I was watching people being lifted out of their wheelchairs and arrested this morning on CNN in the senators' offices. And it was I was like, this isn't happening in America. But on the other hand, it was very good because I remember living through, a lot of political situations, the Vietnam War and AIDS. And that's what we did. And that's how we got to where we are on a lot of those issues, by not just sitting around, but actually being active and letting our voices be heard, but in a way that was not violent. Things changed in America because of that. But I watched a reporter tell off the White House press person today, and he was not nasty. He said, this is our job. Our job is to stand here and question you, and your job is to tell us what's happening.
Story where they had to have reporters resign.
Come on, you're inflaming everybody right here, right now with those words. This administration has done that as well. Why in the name of heavens? any one of us, right, are replaceable. And any one of us, if we don't get it right, the audience has the opportunity to turn the channel or not read us.
I think
you have been elected to serve for 4 years at least. There's no option other than that. We're here to ask you questions.
Right.
We're here to provide the answers. And what you just did is inflammatory to people all over the country who look at it and say, see, once again, the president is right and everybody else out here is fake media. And everybody in this room is only trying to do their job.
Well, I disagree completely. First of all, I think if anything has been inflamed, it's the dishonesty that often takes place by the news media.
And it just sort of gave me chills because he was not being mean or anything. He was just like, stop criticizing us. This is what we do. We're here to just report and we want to work with you. It was a really great interaction because it was just very specific.
And this is what was culturally challenging for him when he first moved to Paris.
When we come from a result-oriented culture like America, where how do I get this done? How do I do this? You know, we're always inventing things. How can I order dinner without talking to a person and have it delivered, you know, da-da-da-da-da. So we're very good at that, for better or worse. Whereas in France, it's a whole different mindset. And I really had to change the way I thought and acted. You know, I love observing the cultural differences between Americans and French people. I'm often called upon to explain them because I have a blog and I write about them, or just in daily life. French people are always asking me, well, about something political that's happening in America, for example. And I have to explain it through the lens of being an American. It's interesting. It's tiring too, because you're always thinking about stuff. It's like, I just want to sit in front of TV and watch the Kardashians or something some days.
If you're really into good food, what is not to love about living in Paris?
You know, in my neighborhood, there's like 3 butcher shops, 3 bakeries. Actually, there's like 6 bakeries, lots of restaurants, sausage makers, cheese shops. And there's a huge market, twice a week. And that's what really drew me to France, was that culture. Going to buy cheese, going to a cheese maker, going to the pastry shop, getting bread, and so forth. That's what I was always really attracted to about France. And nowadays, it's also the cheap wine, because when wine is $4 a glass, it's, like it is in France, or $6. But when you come to America and it's $16, you're like, what? For a glass? Yeah.
I was curious to know if he gets obsessed over certain foods for a period of time.
I'm redoing my ice cream book, updating it for the 10-year anniversary. So now I'm kind of obsessed with ice cream because a lot has changed in the last 10 years. We're really into ice cream in America, especially. But anywhere in the world now, all these new places are opening. So ice cream is sort of my fascination. But a lot of it depends on where I am. Sometimes like when I went to Ireland a couple years ago, I got obsessed with butter because they have this wonderful butter there. When I went to Lebanon, I was obsessed with olive oil and za'atar. When I went to Israel, I got obsessed with Middle Eastern food because it's such it's a melting pot there of, Syria, Persia, all these different cultures, restaurants, and the food comes together there. Somebody once said to me, they like my blog because they never know what's going to happen next, what the next post is going to be. And that's true. Sometimes I'm like, now it's summer and I'm thinking about lemonade. So I'm like, I should do a post on lemonade. And I just did a post today about a Venezuelan chocolatier in Paris. And especially in America, we don't think it's weird to have like a breakfast burrito for breakfast, and then, sushi for lunch, and then Italian for dinner. I kind of have eclectic food tastes.
If you follow David's food blog, then you already know this is something he's been at for a while. In fact, he and a few others pioneered food blogging back in the day.
Well, Well, I started my blog in 1999 when I was still in San Francisco, and I had just written my first book, and I thought, oh, it'd be nice to have a website to be in touch with people that might have questions about the recipes. When I moved to Paris, I started writing about Paris, of course, and recipes, and then I started hearing about food blogs, and I kind of looked them up, and there was like 3 of them. There was Adam Roberts, Amateur Gourmet, Clotilde Dessoulier of Chocolate and Zucchini. And I kind of read them and left comments, and they kind of left comments or interacted with me somehow. And then we all kind of got to know each other, and there were 7 of us. And then we'd say, oh, did you see this? There's this blog. This blog started from England, and then there was 8 of us. And it's kind of funny when you think about it now, what it's become. It was really sweet because we were all very innocent, and we were doing it because we didn't really have an end game. A lot of people start blogs now and they want to start a company, or they want to make money or monetize it somehow. You know, if you look at my old blog posts, I would write these crazy things about France, things that happened to me or whatever, like 8 kooky things in the French supermarket. But one day it was funny because I got an email from somebody that said, how can you be so critical of France and you don't understand anything? Then right after, there was a French woman that wrote to me, and she goes, you understand everything about France, and that's why I love you.
If you're interested in becoming a chef or a baker, here's some valuable advice.
A lot of people want to go into cooking. Cooking has been romanticized in the last few years. As being something that, it's fun, I want to be a chef, I want to be, famous, I want to have tattoos. And it's a great line of work, but it's really hard. And, we get older, it's like, well, okay, what am I going to do now? All my tattoos are sagging and, da-da-da. So I tell people, a lot of people think baking is fun. I loved being a professional baker. It was great, but it's very hard work. So I tell people, go to a bakery and volunteer, like do an internship at a restaurant. If you're good, you'll like it, you can see, don't go to cooking school yet, but do that and see if you like it. I have a friend who wanted to be a caterer, and I said, well, why don't you go work for a catering company on the weekends when you're not working? He goes, oh, I don't want to work on the weekends. I was like, well, I don't think like a lot of people get married on Tuesday night. If you want to be a caterer, you're going to have to work really hard. One thing that, this whole cooking thing the last few years is, these macho chefs or people who are kind of crazy, blah, blah, blah. A lot of crazy people get into restaurant work because there's no bar of entry. Anybody can cook, which is great. It's kind of like blogging. Anyone can do it. People need to be prepared physically and emotionally for a very challenging job.
When you move your job from a restaurant to working from home, you realize that there are certain things that you end up missing.
I actually miss the camaraderie. I miss working with people because I'm alone a lot. When you're a writer, you're sitting in front of a computer. Even when you're writing like a recipe, a cookbook, you're at home testing recipes and you don't have that taste this, or what do you think of this? Or someone could come, say to you, try this, or this isn't good. So I miss that interaction with people.
David has written 6 books, and so I was curious to know what sort of challenges he faced with his latest book, Le Part.
The thing about writing a memoir is usually you're writing it because something happened to you, and not everything that happens to you is something you want to relive. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be really fun to talk about. And it was. The challenge for me was to show the absurdity without being critical too much. Like I said, things that went wrong were my fault, the way I behaved and so forth. People say to people like me, they're like, stick to food. I'm like, it's all about food. Politics is food. Healthcare is food. I was recently a speaker at a writers' conference, in Iceland, and I was the only food writer, and people didn't know what to do with me because they were like, oh, I write poetry and I write history. I'm like, it's all about food. Like, food figures into everything. So
that's going to wrap it up for us. You can find Lepart and David's other books on Amazon. And while you're at it, check out his blog at davidlebovitz.com. And you can also follow him on Twitter at David Lebovitz. And like always, we'll have all of this and more in our show notes on our website at expatsandwich.com. Special thanks to MSNBC for the White House press clip. Thanks to Patreon members Louise Walker, Tim Hurst, Jay Shen, and at Honorable Husband. We are incredibly appreciative of your generous support. And if you're a fan of the show and want to know how you can help us out, head on over to patreon.com/expatsandwich to make a donation. You can also leave us a review on iTunes. You know, I gotta say, it's really nice to get feedback from our listeners. And many thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate you. Expat Sandwich is produced by Marty Walker.